First take. All right, welcome. This is the Jack Kerouac episode.
Jack Kerouac, one of the signature members of the Beat Generation.
Signature, yeah.
He he I guess you could say he's the premier member of
Right,
the
right, yeah.
generation. The quote unquote generation. It is a few writers, but this is a group of individuals that have bring a little bit of romanticism back to the Western canon post World War II, immediately after World War II.
Mm,
You know,
mm-hmm,
America
mm-hmm.
America emerged as this superpower, and
Right,
these
right.
people were emerged as almost like priests of its
Mm,
sort of
mm,
underclasses, praising its sort of maybe its different corners that
mm,
could be found
mm.
throughout it. You know,
Yeah, yeah. That's
whether
interesting.
it was a jazz artist or working class people or
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
immigrants working in restaurants and
mm-hmm,
just
mm-hmm,
anybody on the fringes. It was sort of a different way of sort of exalting the fringes.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
It's interesting how we sort of have these spurts of romanticism after periods of time when it seems like people have everything figured out.
Mm,
As
mm-hmm,
soon as
mm-hmm,
as soon as we think like, oh, we've got everything figured out, there's a blast of romanticism, and that
mm-hmm.
was the Beat Generation in the 50s.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's a fair thing to say. With Kerouac, he's definitely someone who's like on the outskirts, because he grew up in a very, I was doing a little bit of reading on him. He grew up in kind of a poor area. He wasn't well to do, but
Mm,
he did go to Columbia University on a
okay,
football scholarship, funny enough.
that's
I don't know if
interesting.
he had a scholarship, but he played on the team, you know. He
Okay.
went there to play football. He had to go to a prep school to prepare for it.
Mm.
You know,
I
it was
think that.
kind of it was kind of there that he, sort of like met people who were, sort of a, upper echelon, kind of showed him around the, city of New York. He came from, small town in Massachusetts.
That's interesting.
Hmm.
He's always somewhat of a traveler,
Yeah, yeah. A little bit of an outsider.
man, rambler.
Right, right. So it's kind of interesting with him and, because we think, post World War II America, this is sort of like the sort of like the exaltation of like what it means to be an American. We sort of have this like high ideal, like that's like peak Americana. And, in a way, Kerouac during this time is actually showing like, he also is exalting the American, but maybe, sort of the, uh, so like the salt of the earth American,
Right, right.
and instead of this sort of like high unachievable ideal, he's like, you know, taking these, sort of, he's exalting, something that's like kind of lowly in a way.
Like he's
Bring it,
he he's almost he's I mean, he would go on, he would inspire people like, like even like like Hunter S. Thompson, that like almost
right?
like really get their hands dirty in what they do.
Mm-hmm.
Kerouac is
Mm-hmm.
really like, he's out drinking at night and talking to people in alleys, and
Mm-hmm.
sort of exalting and like the not the fringes of America, while at the same time almost like praising. This is almost like the beginnings of American consumerism. And so
Mm-hmm.
so like consumerism and consumption almost get are almost praised in a certain way by Kerouac, because this is before the American populace or the American people have grown a resentment towards consumerism. So Kerouac,
Yeah,
he like there's an element of consumption
yeah.
uh in his poetry, whether it's drugs, alcohol, good
Mm-hmm.
food, and all
Yeah.
types of things. So
right. Yeah.
good music, art, like
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
culture. You know,
Mhm.
Kerouac
Mhm.
is like
Yeah.
he's engaging. He's like able to consume, but he's early enough where he doesn't feel the bite of being a consumer. Like you're a
Mm, mm.
consumer.
Yeah, I can see that. He definitely has a, a hedonistic, side to him. But while he's definitely he doesn't shy away from that hedonism either. But I kind of lost my way there a little bit, but
Yeah,
with
I think
him,
a bug flew past my eye or something. I don't know
yeah,
what happened.
I think I saw that. I think I saw that
Yeah,
bug. Yeah,
yeah,
right.
it almost threw
You
me
know,
off. I don't know what happened.
right. Yeah, yeah. It distracted me. I lost my
Yeah,
train of thought with that.
pat it on. You
Right.
know,
But
like much like Kerouac, I live in squalor. You know,
mm-hmm.
this
Yeah,
apartment's infested with all sort of any number of bugs and different
right,
insects.
right. And
But
and his mother was dead. Dead, dead, dead.
but and so this is the thing. So Kerouac, we have someone who's a we the beats themselves. They're exalted America. They
Mm-hmm.
have this romantic notion of America, but and it's interesting. There's always a certain. It seems like there's a certain pattern sometimes between the different episodes we do, because last week we had Edgar Allan Poe. Our last
Mm-hmm.
time, you know,
Right,
there was Edgar Allan Poe, and our not last time, but a couple. We did the Edgar Allan Poe episode, and
right.
Edgar Allan Poe, uh, in his search of the mysterious, or in his search of something transcendent in America, even though America had been, spanned coast to coast, it was found in the spirit world and in the
Mm-hmm.
macabre and
Mm-hmm.
in,
Yeah.
ancient times. You know what I mean? But
Mm-hmm.
now in the Beat generation, there must be new frontiers, and they find these new frontiers, and the drugs, the alcohol,
Mm-hmm.
are going to these marginalized communities, are going to these different cities. The notion of being strangers, just being like a stranger in a place, is sort of a new frontier, even if sort of the West has already been won, or if you know, like the manifest destiny has been fulfilled, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah. It is definitely, sort of a continuation of sort of, the transcendentalism, the romanticism. Um, we have kind of had a little bit of a pattern here. Um, I was reading a review of some of Kerouac's poetry, and someone was, sort of saying that it, kind of gave some like imagist, kind of, vibes to him more or less, and which is also something we've covered recently. But also we've been mostly looking at like American poetry, or through sort of this kind of American lens, and so maybe that's why it seems to have some kind of a pattern, because Kerouac is definitely an American, like Walt Whitman is, or that's kind of the where I would put him at, is up there with
Mm-hmm.
Whitman. And it's kind of interesting how I think it kind of says something about what it means to be a sort of a poet, is that Kerouac, he wrote a lot of fiction. He wrote like s- many novels. Like most of his writing that we have is are novels,
Right.
but we still kind of think of him, which is I think is kind of great that we're doing an episode like this, because he is thought of as a poet, but he's kind of more, he's really just a writer. He's kind of more of
Right.
a novelist, who but we kind of think of him primarily as a poet, I think. Um,
Mm.
it,
Do you want do
yeah,
you want to know why I think that is?
why?
I think that has to do with sort of his approach to writing. You know,
Mm-hmm,
Kerouac sort of has that
mm-hmm,
this like stream of consciousness.
yeah,
That's prose. That's what it is. He's known for his
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
stream of consciousness
Right, right, right.
prose.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So
Yep.
he's already, he's already sort of blending some of these sort of what seemingly disparate themes, like we have jazz, the novels, and you know being sort of a ne'er do well, a bum, if you will, in society. Like, what does being a bum have to do with jazz? Have to do with sort of novels? But in a way, there is a connection there, and I think the connection that Kerouac is helping form is like almost the notion of counterculture itself. Like the thing about the Beat Generation, they almost can smell counterculture. Like they almost can like smell the percolations of counterculture. Like they can't they don't quite put their finger on it, but even in their name, like the Beat Generate, like people who were sort of the younger people who were sort of reading these writers, who became known as beatniks, they got the name beatnik from the Russian satellite Sputnik.
Mm-hmm,
So there's almost like a like people are almost identifying them as the fringe, the strange, the foreign. Even Kerouac and Ginsberg, you can find in Allen Ginsberg, another member of the Beat Generation, you can find in their poetry like talking about how they're not necessarily Anglo Saxons, or basically alluding to how they're not sort of waspy types. They're not wasps.
mm-hmm,
So this is so, and even though that obviously they still view the world sort of through a white lens, I guess you could say, but they are kind of developing this notion of counterculture, which was
mm-hmm.
sort of bloom in the in the next decade with the hippies, and sort of
Right,
become
right.
something tangible that people could put their finger
Yeah.
upon. And I wouldn't necessarily call the Beats proto hippie, but
Right,
like I
but
said,
there's a connection there.
they're almost a proto counterculture.
Right,
It's like
right.
a proto
Yeah.
counterculture.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. But I think it just kind of speaks to sort of that ephemeral quality of, kind of what it means to be a poet, that we think of, Kerouac as primarily a poet. At least that's how I'm making that kind of assumption. I feel like that's like the popular kind of perception of him is that of a poet, while he's really more, yeah, prose, more of a novelist, rather than a poet. It is primarily his output, but it's sort of, kind of what it means to be a poet, kind of even, it's like, you know, Bob Dylan a few years ago winning the Nobel Prize for literature.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, like, it is literature, in a very loose, yeah, in a looser sense of the term. Yes, what he does, but when you make a significant contribution, um, it can kind of come in. It tends to come in many forms, and that's sort of Kerouac's, I guess, kind of gift, is that he has a very um, individualistic sort of style, and I think that's why it's also so American in a way. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and why it fits in with like the transcendentalists and the romantics kind of before him, is because it is much more like the path of the individual,
Mm-hmm.
um, and so that's what kind of makes it American, and almost kind of lends to Americana, although you wouldn't think of like the Beats, the beatniks and the hippies as being like an Americana movement. Um, some ways maybe it wasn't, but sort of at the heart of it, I think it is something kind of like sort of deep within the American psyche of like the individual. You know,
Mm. I
sort of
think
how
I
we
think
kind of pride. Yeah.
I mean there's something to that. It might could go
Hmm.
back to Americans having our unalienable rights, or
Hmm.
it might go back to sort of modernism sort of being an exaltation of the self in general.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, but when it comes to the beats, they almost are the beats are this weird. They have this weird fringe quality. They almost exist between modernism and postmodernism. A bit of cynicism, but yet a bit of appreciation, a bit of consumption, a bit of indulgence. It's like they exalt the self and they exalt the senses, but they push our notion of America by almost like not getting too political. Like the hippies compared to the Beats, the hippies were much more political,
Right.
anti-war and
Yeah.
all that. But
Hmm.
the but
Hmm.
a lot of the Beats, especially Kerouac himself, Kerouac was much less political.
Right.
And this sort of pushed our notion of the American. It like and it all and it also countered it, but it did not have that post it did not quite have the postmodern cynicism, yet it was sort of postmodern in the way it sourced jazz, the way it sort of sourced individuals that were on the fringe, even prisoners, which Derrida and Foucault, they always, some of their first appeals were not to people of different races but to people in jail, you know. So in America there's just sort of a convenient overlap in some of these sort of power dynamic categories. But Kerouac pushed our notion of the American by sort of highlighting the fringe, but exalting what would become, you know, in some ways, the American consumerism. But in the days of the Beats, it was almost a, a way to dance in the rain, dance in the fallout of World War II.
Yeah. I mean, that's a.
I
I don't know
mean,
how to
when
pick it up right from there, but
the thing about and
okay,
for anybody watching this, the thing about
yeah.
Jack Kerouac is he he celebrates something that's almost un you almost can't quite name, something that maybe we've almost lost in our day and age.
Mm.
We, it's and not maybe we still have it, but I don't know if there's any body out there preaching quite this way, because we've had, I mean, obviously like a drug like marijuana has been chopped up and commodified now amongst the states so insanely, and we have so much, we have a much stricter society, with as far as the rules and things like that. But there's definitely no like we don't have like traveling bums in our society these days. The homelessness in our society is much more local and much more concentrated
Yeah.
in the
Yeah.
cities.
Yeah. There's something about it with him being kind of, traveling on the, kind of traveling by train, but he was still someone who was, like he didn't graduate, but he went to Columbia. He went, I think to the new school. Um, he went to like that horseman prep school. He was, fairly educated. He wasn't you know, highly educated for his time, but he wasn't. There weren't too many people probably jumping on trains at that time that had gone to Columbia.
Right.
That's probably I don't think that's a high overlap. Um, and that's kind of an interesting um, that's kind of an interesting thing with poetry and how you can kind of have sometimes often it's like people of like sort of a higher it's almost like of the arts it's like tennis or golf as far as
Mm,
like school sport goes
right.
and the kind of people like generally that you see like playing like tennis or golf in high school or you know these are the same kids in the art departments that are doing poetry that's kind of like you know maybe Jack Kerouac here a little bit or even
Well, well, it's interesting
yeah,
because like Kerouac, he, some of the beat poets, they were a bit against T.S. Eliot.
mm,
Because T.S. Eliot, he was sort of seen as sort of more of the academy or something like that, or
mm,
of sort of the higher sort of that, like you were saying, like maybe like you know like that
the
high,
ivory tower kind of.
yeah, kind of thing, because like his poem The Wasteland, like that was the first poem that had like a footnote.
Hmm.
So that seemed, it's almost like, I mean, what does that say about the poem? Like, what does that say about the mindset of the poet to actually put a footnote on the poem? You know, so and so it's interesting. Like, William Carlos Williams, we've done an episode on him. He had his rub with T.S. Eliot, sort of the, and he was a praiser of Edgar Allan Poe, a
Hmm.
romantic whom we have covered on this channel.
Hmm.
And now we have another romantic who's famously harkened back to William Carlos Williams. It's almost coming full circle. And T.S. Eliot also did not like Edgar Allan Poe. So T.S. Eliot's kind of shaping up to be a bit of a villain so far.
But T.S. Eliot is
we're
probably
gonna
my favorite of the bunch.
we're gonna have to he's gonna have his own episode.
Yeah, I mean he has. I mean,
But basically, yeah. So because so T.S. Eliot's had a bit of a rub with some of the poets that we've done so far, and I guess it could be seen a bit of a rub with some of the beat poets. Maybe not Kerouac in particular, but a lot of the times the beat poets, they do get lumped together. You
yeah.
know.
But I think it's interesting too, because like even in the Edgar Allan Poe episode, kind of talked about like he even kind of made enemies in a way,
Mm,
and you think, um, kind of in sort of today's day and age, it almost seemed kind of like kind of trite, if a poet of T.S. Eliot or William Carlos Williams or Edgar Allan Poe were making enemies or disliking someone or hating on someone or something like that.
right.
But it kind of almost sort of it kind of just shows that I don't know, maybe the sort of
The more things change, the more they stay the same.
yeah, absolutely. You think with like genius, you think like, almost like perfect or, just get, you know, being, agreeable doesn't make you smart. Um,
Mm, that's true.
and so it's okay to dislike things. It's okay to be sort of adamantly opposed or to maybe even to actively to dislike something. That's okay. That doesn't make you less smart. To
Mm,
have enemies. It also doesn't
right.
mean having enemies gives you anything. It just kind of shows that.
I guess it just shows that
It's
maybe you have a point of view. I don't know. You have a,
yeah,
if you have enemies, I guess it just shows that you do have a point of view.
yeah. But yeah, it's just kind of an interesting thing. Kind of makes these guys human a little bit.
And it does. It's interesting. So yeah, so we're gonna definitely have to put a T.S. Eliot episode on the docket.
Yeah, that'll be
But
fun. That'll be fun. But we're doing Jack Kerouac, dude. We gotta
right,
jump into these poems.
right. That is true. And little background. Get into Jack Kerouac's poetry. How
Hmm.
one of the things about we talked about how his novels feature the the free flowing prose that he's like known for, but his poetry was often inspired by jazz,
Hmm.
and he wanted it to have that sort of
Music,
improvisational
yeah.
aspect
Hmm.
of jazz, because some of his poems, if a person's sort of not aware of his style or not aware of what he's going for, they may seem a bit disjointed or a bit sporadic. But there's sort of a method to this madness. There's a sort of spirit to his poetry, you know.
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah, also, blues music, of course, and just music kind of in general. Like he's definitely kind of trying to sort of capture the music of s- kind of the everyday American person, in his poetry. That's kind of how I read it and sort of take from it. Um,
Mm,
which yeah, it's it's kind of a beautiful thing, but it makes it kind of interesting when when you listen to him,
yeah,
which is kind of the great thing. This is the first poet that we're really talking. I mean, William Carlos Williams, um, even Robert Frost. They have poems. Tracy K. Smith. They have poems that they've read aloud and have been recorded. But Jack Kerouac's is like definitely music, which
right.
uh,
And a lot of these his poetry are they're known as choruses.
hmm hmm yeah, which kind of gives it sort of they're all sort of this you know related. Yeah, they kind of have this interrelated. Uh, you can kind of take something from one by itself, but it also it you know it doesn't stand alone. It stands alone, but it doesn't.
That's it's very something that's sort of interesting is like this is another way that the beats they sort of scrape against like postmodernism in a weird way is like the beats have they're known as the beat generation. They inspired the hippies, and then they come from the jazz. They're incorporating the jazz and the they're like the blues. They're traveling around like blues artists, the hippies. Then it sort of goes into like like hip hop beat beat generation. You know, just seems sort of like these countercultural movements sort of have this this like the term hip you know
Hmm.
like they have this sort of they have these that they're described with these terminologies that almost represent sound, rock, rock and
Hmm.
roll.
Hmm.
um
Hmm.
I don't know. It's just and all of these have been, from rock and roll, hip hop to the hippies. They've all been countercultures.
Hmm.
And the
Hmm.
beat, hip hop. So the whole smooth daddy o. That's
Yeah.
now we're dealing with the beats. The
Yeah.
smoking the cigarette, playing the bongos, reciting
Yeah. Yeah.
poetry. That's the beat. So when we read these
Probably
poems,
communist.
right, definitely the beatniks. It came from Sputnik,
Hmm.
just like
Hmm.
Sputnik was sort of something contrary. So too are the beatniks. You want to go first, Jess?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, I'm gonna share the screen and Sarada Medellin Blue.
I'm reading this here real quick to myself because I want to Kerouac has a certain way about him that
He
he
does.
it's
We almost should have a little piano sound playing or something.
I wish I had Steve Allen,
Right.
Steve Allen playing the piano for me. All right, so my poem here, and again, as you'll see, first solo, first chorus. This is a part of a larger kind of series, and this is just one, and this is the first one. Um, from a book called it's Book of Blues by Kerouac. Um, but here we go. Serrata Medellin Blues, first solo, first chorus. Even when I was a little boy, I was always alone with my guardian angel. Playing Tarzan, an icicle fell on me and cut my arm. I had a rope around my neck. I was hanged in Innisfree. Had my hand cut off in perfidy. Never had my fill of thee. Saint Michael in corner, 9 feet tall. I kind of, I wouldn't even mind. You know what? I'm gonna go for it one more time. I'm gonna read it
All
one more
right.
time. I hope our audience doesn't mind.
All
Maybe we
right.
can even clip this off. I
Go
want to
hit
give
it.
this a good, I want to give this a good one. All right, all right. Serrata, Medellin, Blues. Even when I was a little boy, I was always alone with my guardian angel. Playing Tarzan, an icicle fell on me and cut my arm. I had a rope around my neck. I was hanged and in it free. Had my hand cut off in perfidy. Never had my fill of thee. Saint Michael in the corner, 9 feet tall. That's kind of my best, you know.
You really, you kind of get the. I like the Kerouac impression.
Yeah, I'm trying to emphasize it like he does because he has this thing like playing in Tarzan. An icicle fell on me and cut my arm. It kind of
He
just
has a
like
kind.
music. Like if you want,
It is a very improvisational style. It's like spurts of a trumpet. You know.
I had a rope around my neck. you
I was
know,
hanged in Innisfree. Had my
you,
hand
you
cut off in perfidy.
like you almost have to
Never
think of
had
like
my fill of thee.
I'm thinking of like Larry David, and like you know,
There's a bit of that there. There's a bit of that cadence there.
and Seinfeld, yeah, playing talk, never had my fill of thee, you know,
Saint Michael in the corner, 9 feet tall.
yeah. You know how you do, even though I was a little boy, I
Even
was
when I
always alone with my guardian angel.
that is how he does it. And if you want to taste the Jack Kerouac, like some of his musicality, look up his album with Steve Allen. That first one he
Mhm,
did.
mhm.
Oh man,
Yep.
that's great. That's a good one. But
Yeah.
Jack Kerouac is definitely one of my favorite poets. I mean,
Yeah.
and the poem is almost as much about the experience of the poem as it is about reading the poem itself. I mean,
Mhm.
you almost just enjoy the sounds. How can he's just pulling from different images of his life. It's almost not so much about the analysis. The analysis is almost like
Yeah. He,
you read the poem.
yeah. He's a tough one to sort of analyze, like like we've been doing, with other poets, and like it kind of makes him. sort of difficult in that way, or even I
inaccessible.
read a couple reviews. Yeah, people say some of it's you know uh painful, or that it's not very good. There's a lot of his poetry isn't very good. It's kind of
I
not
don't. I'm not sure who said it. It might. I don't think it was T.S. Eliot, but someone said, "This isn't writing. This is typing." Someone
mm-hmm,
said that of
mm-hmm,
his poetry.
yeah,
Um,
but
yeah, no.
but that's the thing. I think Kerouac has such a he is able to kind of capture things, and he captures feelings, and sort of through his language. um it's not very technical, but then again, neither is the people that you speak to on the street every day. Are they speaking with proper grammar? Probably not. I'm not right
Right,
now as we speak. um
right.
and so he kind of captures the sort of musicality, and uh sort of the image of kind of your everyday American. It might be you know on the train, or uh in a diner. um but I think sometimes he even touches on something too, even beyond just that description. Sometimes I think he does kind of touch on, like all great poets, and that like little sort of kernel of truth that like that's what makes it a poem, right? And this is a chorus of many, and it's kind of a yeah, it's a series. It's one of many. It's one of a series. So, but we kind of we have this even when I was a little boy, I was always alone with my guardian angel, right? um Playing Tarzan, kind of what, being a wild child. An
Mhm.
icicle fell on me and cut my arm. I had a rope around my neck. I was hanged in Innisfree. Kind of the images I get from this. It's a in a free in it's free. Kind of is the goes back to like William Butler Yeats. He has this Isle of Innisfree is a famous poem by him, and it's one. From me, I kind of get this. It's almost like this sort of, maybe like a place of purity. you know
Mm.
and you know Jack Kerouac here is kind of reflecting on him as a child, almost like he almost was like in childhood, in this like guardian our Garden of Eden. He was in this like sort of protected state. Even when he was a little boy, he was alone with his guardian angel. But then out playing wild, an
Mm.
icicle fell on me and cut my arm. He kind of gets hurt there. This whole, I had a rope around my neck. You think of Tarzan swinging from tree to tree. Sometimes he is kind of like on ropes or like vines and things like that,
Mm.
but swinging free with a rope around your neck, I don't, is that like, I don't know, it's like almost, it's like an image of like just going too far. He had his
Mm.
hand cut off in perfidy. You know, perfidy Perfidy spelled with a Y instead of the two E's. That's kind of means doing something like in deception, like usually like
Mm.
in war. Um, that it's kind of like it's a crime, for doing something deceptively. And so like think of him like getting his hand cut off in deception, just like a thief.
Mm.
Never had my fill of thee. You know,
Right. It's almost like a loss of innocence. You know,
yeah, a little bit. Yep.
you never will have your fill of innocence.
Hmm. I never had my fill of thee. I still love you.
Right. Of thee,
But
he almost says of thee like Romeo gesturing sort of
Mhm.
to Juliet, to the sun or
Mhm.
something.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
again, when we have the romanticism, we have the past sort of shows back up, and
Mhm.
now we're making allusions to Innisfree and
Mhm.
Saint Michael. You know, uh,
Yeah.
and Kerouac is an artist that'll feature Catholicism right next to Buddhism.
Right. Right. Well, yeah, so he grew up, Roman Catholic, parents are French Canadian. Um, but, also with this, thinking, Saint Michael in the corner, 9 feet tall. It's almost like him. I'm picturing him like down,
Mm,
you
mm,
know? And, you have Saint Mike, he's down on the ground laying, looking up, stab wound, never had my fill of thee, and Saint Michael looming in the corner, his guardian angel.
mm.
Uh,
Right. All right. I
it's
imagine like Saint Michael just watching, like making sure the icicle just cut his arm instead of hurting him worse.
mm, mm, yeah, perhaps
You
that
know,
too. Yeah,
or maybe Saint Michael makes the icicle fall. Maybe Saint Michael thought, "Hey, it's time for your innocence to be over."
yeah,
Hey, the many interpretations of poetry.
right, yeah. But I mean, it's the thing. There are many ways in which you could take this, and I mean, it is, I've said it several times, it's one in a series, but, just taking this on its own, and, you get that sort of loss of innocence, you get, um, you kind of have a sort of this unsettled feeling, but we're almost, this still, even as sort of counterculture as it is, it still very much plays into this, sort of Protestant, even though grew up Roman Catholic, feelings of guilt and original sin and things that we're all sort of we carry on our shoulders.
Mm-hmm.
But he there's not a lot of also kind of with this being kind of modernist, like you were saying earlier, sort of towing the line between postmodern. There's not a lot of like poetic devices. You don't have rhythm isn't quite the same. You don't have rhyme. Um,
Not
you
no
do have the
steady
line
meter.
that's sort of, yeah, you sort of had the line and you had the indentations and their aspects. You don't have any periods, you know. And it doesn't end stop, necessarily. And when you hear him read it, it's sort of, kind of off the cuff. It seems hard to believe that it's written down on paper. Um,
Mm, right.
but I think that kind of speaks to sort of maybe just, yeah, I'm not trying to like toot the horn of America, but just it kind of just speaks to America, in a way.
Mm. It speaks to America. This is an American poet, and this is sort of like an American style. But the thing about romantics and sort of any sort of appeal to romanticism, you just have to find their heaven. Like, where is their heaven? Like, some of the, some of your the earlier romantics, even your Walt Whitman, someone like that, they may find it in a blade of grass or in a mountain, you know, or but Kerouac, might find it in a bottle in a bar, in some dirty bar with some questionable women and sort of hard drinking men, and like what's the difference between that and a mountaintop, or what's the difference between that and a field of wildflowers?
Yeah. It's
It's
wild. Kerouac dying at the age of 47, married 3 times.
right. He's a sweet guy.
Yeah, died cirrhosis of the liver, 47 years old.
Hard drinker. The
Yeah.
one the poem I'm doing is also one of his choruses. It is from Mexico City Blues. A it is also a collection of choruses. It's a collection of like 250 something choruses, but different ones stick out over time. This is one that stuck out over time. Bob Dylan actually liked this one, and he talks about it. Kerouac, he's inspired a lot of artists from not only the counterculture of the '60s, but a lot of the artists of the '60s. Your Bob Dylan, The Doors, and even the Beatles as well. But this is the 231st chorus, and I'm gonna give it a whirl. Give it a whirl. You guys ready? All right. Dead and don't know it, living and do. The living have a dead idea. A person is a living idea. After death, a dead idea. The idea of living is the same as the idea of death. The dead have a living idea. Dead, it ain't my fault. I was only an idea. Respected penitents in a shack dedicated to the study of origin. The good Buddha material is not a sin cloth, cloth of light. Beings alive indicate death by their jaunty work, just as the dead indicate the living by their silence. When rock becomes air, I will be there. All right. So, upon first glance, some people may look at
Oh,
this
excuse
poem
me.
and say, man, I can see it's just really a lot of cool words, but, they may not get too much meaning out of it. But, here is really, we have a kind of everything. This is kind of really highlights a lot of the religious side of Kerouac. In this, we have his Catholicism clashing up against Buddhism and Taoism. We have the good Buddha material is not a sin cloth. The good Buddha material is us, our bodies, who we are, our human bodies. This Kerouac is rejecting the idea of original sin and saying, it's not a sin cloth that, our body is good Buddha material. It's a cloth of light. It can be. We can transcend ourselves to become, we can leave the wheel of samsara and, become an enlightened one. Um, beings and being, and then we get into we have boot we so we have just these three lines. We have a Buddhism contrasting against Catholicism, but then we sort of move into Taoist sort of a Taoist sort of iteration of life and death. If anyone ever reads the Tao, it illustrates points kind of by highlighting opposites. The Tao sort of highlights opposites as a way to illustrate points. But beings alive indicate death by their jaunty work. So as we work and toil and go about our daily lives, we are illustrating the dead lying in the grave. But as we do that, the dead indicate the living by their silence. The same way the dead are silent as they lie in their grave, they are actually indicating they are actually indicating they indicate and gesture towards us the way that we move around. So when rock becomes air, I will be there. This eye, I believe this eye is sort of like the eye of sort of a poetic brilliance, when there's a transcendence, when rock becomes
Hmm.
air,
Yeah.
when there's something transcendent occurs. That is the real root of religion. He's almost saying religion
Hmm.
has sort of all like a root behind it. and the truth of religion is not that we're just like a sin cloth of, he's sort of rejecting that original sin Catholic notion. He's exalting the human body and all of our waves of Kerouac will exalt consumption, even alcoholism and drug use and sex. Not so much in this poem. In this poem, we have more exalting the toils of day to day life, dead and don't know it, living and do. It's almost like when you're dead, you don't know it, but when you're living, you know you're dead. When we are alive, we know we're dead. But when we're dead, we no longer know that. The living have a dead idea. A person is a living idea. After death, a dead idea. Who we are, our personality is nothing but an idea. Justin,
Hmm.
whether you're an idea, we are ideas, whether we are living or dead.
I'm real.
The dead have a living idea. Dead, it ain't my
Yeah.
fault. I was only an idea. Respected penitents in a shack dedicated to the study of origin. That's kind of another jab at the church. The church, how it's kind of pious, and he's saying that all these cathedrals are almost like shacks. But so
Yeah, I mean,
this
in
is
this one,
a
he's.
yeah. Go for it. My bad, Justin.
I was just gonna say, yeah, in this one, he's kind of definitely kind of juxtaposing, sort of the material and the immaterial.
Mm,
Um, and it's kind of summed up there in that when rock becomes there, I will be there. It's sort of the it's this material becoming the immaterial, and you kind of have this flowing back and forth between the living and the dead. The material and the immaterial. The idea. Um, kind of having a sort of a living embodiment. Um, and taking on sort of qualities that with it being living and dead and alive. But yeah, it's
yeah, I mean, and the toil that he talks about, the toil that he talks about, the living as we do as we sort of go about our lives. That's the same toil as poetry. Poetry takes something sort of material or something that sort of happens to sort of happens on one level, and then the poet sort of exalts it, sort of lifts it up, sort of brings it up to a higher level. um and that is almost like the rock becoming air, our experience becoming poetry, and or even just the poet being able to exalt or highlight that experience for us.
mhm, yeah. What was it? What with it? It's like he's he calls it blues. He calls it chorus. Kind of through this music, this sort of um, kind of juxtaposition, this sort of almost like call and it's not quite call and response, but close to that. Kind of going back and forth. He kind of gives you sort of a general picture or idea. He doesn't quite necessarily say it or ever land on any kind of thing. But the two kind of through the two images, and kind of sort of changing that dichotomy throughout. He kind of creates this sort of overall kind of narrative or sort of picture or even like feeling. Sort of describes this uh, this piece of reality.
Mm. And yeah, and like I said earlier, that's a very Tao way of
Yes.
going about it.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely.
It's almost like he went about he it kind of has the jazz, but he used some of the structure of the Tao and
Yeah.
used some of the logic of Buddhism to subvert maybe some of the guilt he was feeling from his
Yeah.
Catholic upbringing.
No. Very much. I mean, just that dead and don't know it, living and do. I mean, that's, basically could be just the Tao,
Right.
which, I mean, that's not the first poet that we've read doing this and has been like that.
Oh no.
No,
Hmm.
no, I know
Yeah.
that. But as I say that, I'm like, I don't know who it is, but I think it might even be William Carlos Williams.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Remember, lightning but not loud.
Right. Yeah. Dead and don't know it. Living and do.
Oh, that was K Ryan.
K Ryan. I almost said K Ryan.
Yeah.
I almost said K Ryan, but I wasn't sure. Yeah. The living have a dead idea.
Hmm.
A person is a living idea. After death, a dead idea. The idea of living is the same as the idea of death. They're just ideas, you know. Um,
See, yeah, it seems like a lot of the poets we've been reading have been kind of saying similar things. We talked about this with Tracy K. Smith and ideas of the future and past
mm,
with her, sci-fi poems and the even the JFK poem with or it was Solstice with the sort of the heightening sort of anxieties.
mm,
Um, a lot of they kind of seem to be speaking towards this thing of kind of these ideas. I feel like that kind of hold us.
mm. A sort this sort of metaphysics. They want to
Hmm.
describe the terrain of our minds, you know.
Hmm. Hmm.
Like what is the mind? How, could I see it better if I bounce something off the walls of it, you know?
I think that a good that I think that's what makes someone a poet, or why even though Jack Kerouac mostly wrote prose and any of these poems just by themselves we wouldn't necessarily say like, oh yeah, this is like a great poem, because it's hard to
Mm,
talk about his poetry in the same way as like we talked about other poets,
right, right,
who are like much more meticulous and his you know is more he captures like the essence of what it means to be a poet.
right. And Kerouac's so different because he's trying to do something different, you know.
Hmm.
Um, he is he's almost preaching the church of a certain view of America. He's preaching his view of America and how people saw America then. This is America before a lot of the cynicism. You
Hmm.
know, I mean, but don't get me wrong, there has always been dissenting voices, but this is America that this is an America that has in some ways almost conquered the world. I mean, the Soviet Union had the other half of the world, but this was an America emerging as a global superpower.
I
So,
also yeah I also read though too interestingly that kind of felt like coming through World War II and the end of World War II in the 40s is like a post-apocalyptic kind of world,
mm,
because he
well,
never finished school at Columbia. He like tried to come back and then tried to go to the Navy and couldn't quite stick with the Navy, and
well,
it was difficult for him like in this sort of
Kerouac, it's strange because like he does exalt like sort of the consumption of America. Because this is like a
mhm,
good time. The '50s were a good
mhm,
time in America, so a
yeah,
lot of booze, a lot of
mhm,
a lot of fun, a lot of stuff like that. But also, you know, uh, the drugs, the alcohol, the sex, sort of the hedonism. But you're right, there is a sort of a post-apocalyptic strain to him because he always, the cities are almost like
mhm,
he almost talks about the cities and the landscape of having been built already. Like,
mhm, mhm,
but it's almost his apocalypse is almost like an apocalypse of wilderness, an apocalypse of
mm,
wildness, into the post apocalypse of, he's almost the like Kerouac's apocalypse is almost the rise of the suburbs, you
mm.
know.
I think often of that line that he has of, all your San Franciscos will fall,
Mm,
you know. But he is an outside character. He is an outsider. Um, so I think that kind of lends to his sort of maybe view of sort of the establishment as not being, maybe not, putting as much stock in the establishment or, want, kind of
mm,
towing, sort of the company line of the time, more or less.
mm,
Um, but it's kind of interesting that Kerouac is like I just find it interesting that he played football,
mm.
like
Yeah,
played sports and was kind of like I, you know, it,
yeah, that's kind of interesting.
it's just kind of an interesting it's just kind of an interesting thing, we don't necessarily picture maybe our literary heroes or someone who is sort of so um
You know,
maybe
uh, well regarded academically, or like sort
yeah,
of
I
a,
was gonna say like sensitive or even
mm,
you know kind of sort of inwardly, looking inward, trying to sort of, uh, kind of pull something out of himself.
right,
He's out there playing football. It's just kind of a funny thing. It's
right,
not,
and
it's
it's
not how we, you wouldn't think of anyone who's, maybe going to college to play football today and be like, I think that guy might be a poet.
mm, yeah, that's true. That's definitely true. But I think it's interesting how you know, like I said, the Beats, they weren't afraid to, use drugs, use alcohol and these sorts of things, and it's sort of as we, kind of get on into the '60s, sort of the kind of the view of the hippies, and the the tune in to drop out, kind of thing. And so that's kind of interesting how these these sort of countercultural movements sort of grow and evolve over time.
Yeah. 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 No, it is. I mean, that's the thing. Everything kind of bleeds into each time bleeds into the next, you know.
Right.
So although it kind of seems be like, wow, counterculture back in the 50s, I thought, the
Yeah.
50s was like you think of like housewives and, like Mad Men, but
But that's what I mean. But and also like because you got to think like Jack Kerouac is almost like he's almost like he's almost like an angel to the devil would be someone like Charles Manson. You know,
mm,
this he might as well be Charles Manson. Yet he's almost like I mean he almost the drugs, the sex, the music, the literature almost took a positive spin with some of the beat generations where someone like Charles Manson, all the same ingredients are there, yet we end up you know with the Manson murders. And Kerouac was tied up in a murder early on as well. So
mm,
I'm just saying like there's sort of like this there's the the what was going on in the 50s definitely bled into the light and dark side of the 60s.
right, right, of course, right. Yeah, and subsequent generations afterwards, because it's like uh, famous, the Ash. that, or it's the Haight Ashbury, sort of neighborhood down in San Francisco that the kind of Beats made famous, is also the place where sort of the 60s, you have like Jimi Hendrix, and that's where like the Red House is, and the Grateful Dead, and acts like that kind of coming out of that same area that the Jack Kerouac and Allen Ginsberg kind of made famous, you know
Right.
10, 15, 20 years prior.
So
So
hey man, it's strange. It's strange. It's the beat. I almost see the beat generation to the countercultures of the 60s, 70s, 80s, and how there's such this common notion of counterculture. It's almost like Pythagoras compared to Plato, you know? Like, don't get me wrong, like the hippies, by the time there was the hippies and on into the 70s and 80s, the idea of a counterculture was firmly established. But in the
right.
time of the beats, it was just it was strange. It wasn't, people didn't necessarily think of the idea of a counterculture. It's almost
Mm,
like Plato and his idea of the higher forms compared to Pythagoras, because Pythagoras thought the world was numbers, just so yeah, Pythagoras was kind of thought the world was underlyingly abstract, but it was Plato who kind of thought of the higher forms. So it's kind of like the beats. Like the beats were counter to the mainstream, but people didn't quite put their finger on it until some of their progeny kind of came about. So
yeah, yeah, yeah. And then also made it, sort of even marketable, and made it mainstream, eventually.
mm, right, right,
Yeah, it's sort of bohemian, you know,
right. Free
dress is like,
love.
yeah, like all that's become just like Americana, like, just you'll see that in any
You'll
mall,
see you'll
you
see
know,
a tie dye Bucky shirt.
yeah, and you can, yeah,
So the
even the fringe
hippies,
hats and all that kind of thing.
right? The hippies added the bright colors and the political bend. The beats didn't really. They didn't do the bright colors. They like black, and they also didn't have the political bend.
Yeah, but a lot of that was Kerouac, and he even kind of shied away from his, all his followers. He didn't
Mm,
really like the, you know, he was almost like Frankenstein. He didn't,
right,
he didn't like the monster,
right, right.
that he kind of created. Sort of became a bit of a recluse at the end.
Mm-hmm. Well, he
Or
like I said,
yeah,
the like the he I think he said like the whole anti-war movement was just an excuse for people to sort of be spiteful. The
mm,
anti-war movement of the hippies, like because Kerouac, don't get me wrong, in the time in post World War II, politics was all figured out. You know,
mm,
obviously by the time Vietnam rolled around, more questions were popping up, but immediately after World War II, everything seemed to be answered as far as you know a traveling Kerouac was concerned.
yeah, yeah,
Kerouac didn't see himself needing to. I mean, what was he going to say about the sort of the Eisenhower years? That really wasn't his. It was a time. It was a certain time. He was obviously a man of his time, as we all are. But
I mean, it when you look at art from that time or work from that time, it does seem like, our notions of what it means to be political are much different.
mm,
You kind of put it in good terms there. Like we would be like, why aren't you speaking about the Eisenhower times? And maybe dealing with the political or dealing with the people didn't necessarily have to do with the president.
right, right.
And it's more and more, become sort of dominant in our lives.
Well, someone like Kerouac, he didn't necessarily have the idea that he was an activist. That had to kind of be an idea of itself. You know,
Hmm.
um,
Right. Yeah. Yep.
and
Yeah.
a lot
So
of
yeah, yeah, it's kind of it's grown over time.
and it's interesting. The beats kind of Columbia University, a lot of that student activism that started at other universities, but it was
Yeah.
kind of like a function of the universities. So
Even to today with
yeah,
the protests or Colombia's in the news,
yeah, yeah. Well, hey, maybe it's
and
something
so
in the
and he
water up there.
right, yeah. I mean, it's in New York City, so
Mm.
that could be part of it, but
Well, hey, yeah. So
yeah,
hey, definitely a cultural figure, cultural powerhouse, Jack Kerouac. Jack Kerouac is my favorite poet. I love
your favorite
his
poet?
my favorite poet. I think I can say.
Mm, okay,
All
all
right,
right.
you know what? I don't. I
No, keep
mean,
it. It's fine.
but the only thing I mean, it's strange that my favorite poet, I actually listen to him more than I read him. So I don't know if that
Mm,
counts because even when I read Mexico City Blues, I sometimes like to put on a good album in the background.
yeah.
So even L.A. Woman. The last time I was reading Mexico City
Mm,
Blues, I was listening to L.A. Woman in the background. So
mm, mm. That's pretty high energy.
yeah, for sure. So I don't know. It's strange that some of my favorite poems are actually almost like Jack Kerouac songs. I don't know.
Mm,
This guy blurs the line between poetry and music and
right, right, yeah.
novel and
And literature and yeah. Yeah, but I mean, hey, I think all maybe good Americans should blur lines.
maybe. And you alluded to it earlier, but I don't know if I can say he's my favorite poet, but I can say October and the Real World Earth is one of my favorite poems.
Yeah, that's a great one. Yeah,
Now it's
yeah.
October and the Railroad Earth.
Mhm. Mhm. But I mean, yeah, and I've listened to a lot of I've even listened to Allen Ginsberg, do blues songs and his there's something about the beats and them doing blues. It's just they get a little bit more overtly musical, and maybe that even blends into Terrence Hayes, and he's doing,
Mm.
gets into more hip hop, and that's kind of like part of the American tradition. I don't know.
Hey man, I think you're highlighting something. You know the the beats with that blues and everything. It's like it it it, it almost it almost I don't know. It almost gives us a little something else. It's almost like they smelled. I mean, it's almost like they smelled something coming.
Hmm.
I don't know.
Well, I mean, a lot of the, villanelle, sonnet, these are old song forms,
That's
and
right.
a lot of in my poem, the kind of the allusion to Innisfree with William Butler Yeats. He's an old Irish poet, but his poetry is very much like in a song form. It's very, musical. And Irish folk songs are, they've even influenced, country music and, uh, yeah, here in the US, so like, some of those song forms and, poetry, there's a blend there. There's
Mm,
a, there's a tradition that kind of goes back. So, I think, kind of trying to create American poetry and kind of contemporary American poetry and stuff, you might have to blend into music a bit.
mm. Yeah, you may have to. That's something to think about. But hey, some of the roots of quote unquote postmodernism, a lot of postmodern ideas and thoughts can be traced to the beats, but also a lot of modern thoughts. So we're here on the fringe with the beats. We're on the fringe in
Hmm.
a lot of different ways with the beats,
Yeah,
especially Jack Kerouac. So
we're on
hey,
the
I
beat, dude. Actually, I'd say we're marching to the beat of a different drum
mm,
here on Verse Take.
a drum all of its own. But hey, that's just what we think, you know.
Hey, and the drum was all alone. And what was it to think? It was mother was dead, and then father was dead.
I said, go low. You've grown. Go grown alone. Go roll your
Yeah.
bone. Go grown alone.
We haven't even talked about, but one of my favorites here before we go is if you could, these ham and these eggs, if you could only lay that down on a trumpet. I love on that album with Steve Allen, you know, Abraham, I see you. You're weird.
Now it's October in the railroad earth.
Man, that was something I remember nights you know, I for our audience, I used to live on a place called Tybee Island and walking on the island at night, headphones, listening to that album. Whew,
Mm.
bring something back.
I remember doing something kind of similar, listening to that album, walking around at night. It's the perfect. That's one of the best
Mm-hmm.
walk around at night albums there is. So
Yeah.
hey man,
So
Jack
hey,
Kerouac. I don't know. He's almost. It's weird. It's almost song. I don't. When I think of my favorite times with him, it's songs. You know. I don't know.
mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. But we haven't talked about it, but I did read the book Dharma Bums. That's the only novel I've read from him, which yeah, I mean it's kind of a different kind of novel. It's sort of autobiographical. I don't know. It kind of was an interesting kind of blends. It was like a confessional novel almost in a sense, um, as I remember. But it's been probably 7 years since I read that book.
Well, hey
But I
man,
would I would be into I'd be interested in reading On the Road.
you know what? I think I might. I need to. I think I should read that.
But hey, I mean, what final thoughts on Jack Kerouac?
Check them out. Keep reading them. Read them. Let it sit. Read them. Let it sit. Don't be afraid to just read like maybe like a chorus here and there. You know,
Hey, hey, look,
thumb through the book. Thumb through the book and
when it
just
comes
pick
to
up
Jack
random stuff.
Kerouac, I got two words for you. Check him out. All right.
He's a great poet.
Yeah. Yeah.
He's gonna seem weird at first, but trust me, he's worth it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's worth it. All right. Well, hey, Jack Kerouac. Who do we have next week?
Um,
Is it is it Keats?
not even sure. I'll look. It'll be a surprise, guys. It'll be a surprise. Just
All right, we'll just surprise you. We'll just surprise. I mean, at this point, you kids figure it out. Just stay
man.
tuned.
Okay, okay. All right. Let's see who we have next week.
Just stay tuned, kids. Yeah,
All right. Let's see. For everybody that's so curious,
right, yeah.
Ezra Pound. Ezra Pound is
Ezra
next.
Pound.
Yeah.
God
Ezra,
damn it.
Ezra Pound is next. Everybody.
I don't think you can throw GD. Well, they probably let you throw GDs around now. Not that
What?
big of a deal.
What are you scared of the man, Daddy-O? You
Well,
scared of the
I don't want the
man.
FCC, coming down on me.
You're not
I
hip
don't
like me. I say what I want because I'm
look.
hip.
Well, I can't take another fine from the FCC. All right, kids. I mean, these guys are fining me, $75,000. It's tough to pay these kind of bills.
I'm not made of money, you know.
Right, which is why you should donate below.
Click the link below. Just kidding. What I want you to do is I want you to jump on that like button, hop on the
Right.
train.
I want you to hit that subscribe button.
And yeah, and then go check out some Jack Kerouac books from your local library.
Right. Slap that like button like it's your mom. Okay, kids.
And you know, it's been fun, guys. We've been on. I've been James. That's my friend Justin over there. And this has been Verse Take, and we are signing off.
Good night.
All right, that was great. That was a fantastic episode.
All right. Hey, I gotta use the restroom.
All right, cool.